How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
One of the things I kept up here, Todd, I saved just for you, is as we're waiting on you, we're sorting through the Pornhub categories. The year in review has the most searched for movie and TV character. What would be number one there?
I'm going to say a Batman related character.
Close. It's the Avengers. They just included the Avengers.
All of them.
Okay.
13,013,900.
Like literally just the Avengers, not specific Avengers.
It just says
because if we're talking Avengers,
like an Avengers orgy.
Maybe they searched for the term Avengers because number 2 was Harley Quinn.
I can't believe Harley Quinn wasn't number 1, honestly.
Yeah, that feels like it would be a popular win. Oddly enough, number 3
last year might have been. I bet last year was probably number 1.
This was last year. He's looking at 2019.
Oh no, I mean like year. Well, I get it.
Teen Titans was number 3 for anybody who cares.
Gross.
Yeah,
illegal.
Well, teens are popular. Captain Marvel also made the top 5, and The Incredibles.
The Incredibles.
Yeah.
Anybody who cares.
Gross.
Yeah,
illegal.
Well, teens are popular. Captain Marvel also made the top 5, and The Incredibles.
The Incredibles.
Yeah.
Well, Toy Story's on this list down a little bit, but there's a significant jump from like Harley Quinn had 9 million searches. The Avengers had 13 million. So there was.
I'm curious what the Avengers, the search results are. I mean, I guess I could find out right now.
What's funny too is the Incredibles are on here, but then later down the list is Elastigirl. So
specifically,
just specifically Elastigirl.
She is what the kids call slim thick.
You got Princess Leia, Batgirl, Deadpool's on here. So good for you, Ryan Reynolds. Toy Story's on here, which I have no clue what.
The search term "Toy Story" on Pornhub is going to bring up quite a few.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, a lot of pull strings.
Yeah.
My Slinky Dog.
Wow.
Woody and Buzz.
Professional comedian. Available for parties, bar mitzvahs.
Also at the bottom of this list,
how many bar mitzvahs have you done,
762,000.
I have yet to be booked for any bar mitzvahs, but
yeah.
I'm totally open to it.
Scooby-Doo was at the bottom of the list here.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I have to assume that's some like for the human characters, but you never know.
Yeah.
You never know what people are into.
Yeah. I also love this really quickly, if I can. They break down the Pornhub Joker searches. So,
like specific people are searching for specific Jokers.
There was it says there was a massive 3,345% increase in Joker searches after the low.
The Joaquin Phoenix movie?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, on October 4th
he's
last
not
year.
Nude in that. Is he?
No.
Is he nude? No.
Yeah, he's not nude in that.
I mean, he has that one scene where he dances in his underwear. So
but
that is not enticing.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's
to each his own.
Clearly, there's something for everybody. And
I love that on May the 4th.
Hence why we're all married.
Star Wars porn. On May the 4th, Star Wars porn jumped 748%.
Well, sure. Yeah, of course.
I mean, I just love the concept that people are like, oh, shit, it's May the 4th. I got to spank one out to Leia or Luke today. Just want to jerk one to Darth Maul. He's somebody I've never fantasized about.
Oh boy.
There's that. Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. You can hardly handle it. That was unintentional, but it works. We are the we're the podcast that discusses the history and legacy of your favorite cult genre.
You've totally forgotten what podcast you're doing now.
Yep.
No, I mean, but we do because we
close the Pornhub window, Gary.
It's
Stop
closed.
looking at it.
If I don't get this
Professionalism,
out,
Gary.
I'm not going to have a good episode. It's I've got to, and I thought we were starting earlier, and I didn't have time, and so while
That's
Justin and I
my
were
fault.
talking,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just got one going, and now I need to
When you get a good one going, listen. As you get older, they get fewer and further between.
Mhm.
So you got to make the most of them.
Yeah, you can cause yourself like stomach cancer if you don't finish. I'm watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Is that true?
If you don't finish, I'm watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Is that true?
And
Stomach cancer?
in the one with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, I finished that one last night. The Next Generation.
The Next Generation, yeah.
One of the guys tells the girl that like he's just like it's not good for it to get all built up in there and stuff. Like
Oh.
you can get like stomach cancer or something.
Are we talking about shit?
No, we're talking about semen. So, I mean, I guess he could have been talking to her about shit.
That would make more sense.
Yeah.
I don't even remember if it was
Like-
stomach cancer specifically, but it's like it's something really ridiculous
Listen.
like that. But it's what I'm going to start using on my wife. Honey, you don't want me to get stomach cancer.
Anyway, introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Gary Horne, and I'm so sorry this started off this way. He's some special.
It's a special guest.
Yeah.
Special guest. Writer, comedian, available for all of your bar mitzvahs.
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
Mr. Todd A. Davis.
Shalom.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd really love to know what the percentage of our Jewish listeners are. What's the Jewish contingent of Cinema Shock? I need to know that now, actually, because it's gonna dictate how I proceed in this episode with my jokes.
Be careful with dictate
So
after you've been
devastating.
watching that much Pornhub, Gary.
I'm just kidding.
Well, this is it, guys. This is our 10th episode, our final episode in this Romero Savini series. Todd is applauding
why is he
because
not-
he's
I'm applying 10 episodes. Hey, all right, good for
I thought
us.
he's just like, yay, we're done with this series.
That's not.
I have like 2 movies out of this series.
I will say
I'm
that
happy for us.
This is the longest we've gone in a series. I feel
Yeah.
like this is the longest we've gone in a series. I feel
Yeah.
like it's certainly an achievement. It feels like something special.
Yeah. And most of our series won't be this long, but we decided to, I don't know, start off on, a big like epic note. So we decided to go with a big long series this time. So,
It broke Todd in to like, let's see if he can hang for the marathon.
Yeah.
We'll
Oh,
reward
come on.
him in the end.
Yeah.
so we
Well,
spent the last 10 weeks on this show documenting, or the last 9 weeks on the show documenting one of the greatest creative partnerships in the history of horror. I don't think that's hyperbole to say that. And that's the relationship between George Romero and makeup effects artist Tom Savini. And now with this episode, we're kind of coming full circle, because on the first episode of the series, we discussed Romero's seminal zombie film, Night of the Living Dead, a film that, of course, it did not involve Tom Savini. Now with this episode, we're kind of coming full circle, because on the first episode of the series, we discussed Romero's seminal zombie film, Night of the Living Dead, a film that, of course, it did not involve Tom Savini. But not for lack of trying, because if you go back to that episode, if you listen to that episode, you know that Savini actually wanted to work on that, and a little thing called Vietnam got in the way.
that pesky
But as it did
Vietnam.
for so many things.
But over the years, Savini proved himself to be just an absolute master of special effects, of makeup effects, and he helped George Romero to change the zombie genre forever in his subsequent zombie movies, Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. In the mid 1980s, as he went along, Savini began, we've talked about he was a makeup effects artist. He was an actor. He was a stunt man. Like, he did everything on a movie, but he had never directed quite yet. Not until the 1980s. Mid-1980s, he cut his teeth as a director by working on 3 episodes of the George Romero produced Tales from the Dark TV series. So when the idea to remake Romero's original zombie film came up, Savini seemed like a natural choice. So today, that's what we're going to discuss. We're discussing Tom Savini's take on the zombie classic as we look at the 1990 version, the remake of Night of the Living Dead.
They came to pay their respects.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Why do you have to be so cruel?
What?
Show some respect.
Now they're running for their lives.
A biologist in Stockton, California have released reports focusing on the phenomenon, specifically on that trance-like state.
Every shelter is becoming a trap.
Are you sure we're gonna be all right?
Cooper, you gotta help me out!
And every road out
Don't stop no matter what happens.
is just another dead end.
They're coming right for us.
George Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Thought it couldn't get any more nighter or livinger or deader.
I wish that was how the trailer went. But
Tom
it wasn't.
Savini's back.
Tom Savini.
I mean, I think that we are not inherently like anti-remake here. I guess I'm speaking for you guys, but I know me and Gary at least have discussed it in the past. Me and Todd, maybe we have as well. But I know that me and Gary both count John Carpenter's The Thing among our favorite horror films, and that's obviously a remake. David Cronenberg's The Fly is a remake, but
Right.
anytime that a classic film is remade, there is some trepidation involved. And even in the case of like The Thing or The Fly, like the originals were not the classics or considered quite the classics that the original Night of the Living Dead was.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I think,
Quite the classics that the original Night of the Living Dead was.
yeah,
so-
I mean, I think that, look, there's always some film, there's going to be some big fans of it. And, when to go to have the chutzpah to go and think that, oh, I can do it better, or, they forgot this, sort of puts you, sort of says that you've got the hubris to either do it better or the way that you're going to do it is going to be better. And I mean, that's a bit of a slap in the face to some of the hardcore fans, I would think.
I think what's funny is like literally today I was thinking about this, not just because of this episode, but also I've been doing the Texas Chainsaw franchise this Halloween. And so I just watched the remake before we recorded. And I was thinking of how weird, I don't remember how much I felt about it at the time that it came out, but I'm going to remake this movie. That's just, I don't know, it's a big leap. At least with this one, it's got some unique circumstances behind it that the others didn't have.
Yeah, because when this movie was announced and when it was being released, there were horror fans who were like, why the hell would you do that? That seems like it seemed like another case of Hollywood either running out of ideas or just trying to capitalize on a well-known IP to try to make a little bit of money. But if you look into the circumstances that Gary's alluding to behind the making of this particular remake, you'll realize that isn't quite the case, because Night of the Living Dead wasn't just trying to cash in on the legacy of Romero's original film. It was, in fact, an attempt to protect his original film. So we mentioned a few episodes back that Romero and his Night of the Living Dead co-writer John Russo had sort of parted ways when they couldn't agree on the direction to take the series. They sort of parted ways when they couldn't agree on the direction to take the series in terms of the sequel. And what that eventually led to was Russo writing his own sequel in novel form. It's called The Return of the Living Dead. And of course, there was a subsequent film pseudo adaptation of that by Dan O'Bannon. And that's a big story. That there's a lot of really interesting moving parts in that particular story that we're not going to get into here because we are planning on visiting Return of the Living Dead at some point in the future. But after the success of Night of the Living Dead, Russo went on to write a lot of books, a lot more novels, and even got into directing a little bit himself. He started his directing career with a sex comedy called The Booby Hatch in 1976. And he followed that up in 1982 with a film called Midnight, which was based on a novel that he had written by the same name. Around the time that Romero was doing Day of the Dead and Monkey Shines, Russo, so that was like a slasher movie, came out in 1986. I have not seen it, but that one wasn't directed by Russo. It was actually directed by Bill Hinsman, who was part of that original Romero troupe, that Image 10 group of guys. He actually played the cemetery zombie in the original Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, nice.
So Hinsman followed that up in 1988 with a film called The Flesh Eaters. Of course, that's kind of an allusion to the original name of Night of the Living Dead, and it's sort of a spoof of Night of the Living Dead from what I've read about it. I have never seen it, but Hinsman wrote and directed that, and also apparently reprises his role as the cemetery zombie in it, which is super weird to me.
But kind of fun, though.
Yeah, I mean, I would see it, but I've heard it's pretty awful.
Oh.
So, at this point, though, it did seem pretty unlikely that Romero and Russo and Russell Streiner and Bill Hinsman would ever really work together again. But all of that changed in 1990 when they saw an opportunity. It seemed pretty unlikely that Romero and Russo and Russell Streiner and Bill Hinsman would ever really work together again. But all of that changed in 1990 when they saw an opportunity to protect the legacy of the original Night of the Living Dead and maybe even make back a little bit of the money that they had never really been able to capitalize on. And this is another something that we talked about way back in episode 1, but just as a kind of quick refresher, because it has been, 2.5 months since that episode.
Yeah.
So the original title for Night of the Living Dead for Romero's film was Night of the Flesh Eaters. They had to change that title kind of last minute to avoid confusion and a possible lawsuit from the people who held the rights to a similarly named film just called The Flesh Eaters. Unfortunately, when that happened, the film's distributors made a fatal clerical error. They forgot to transfer the copyright notice onto the new title, and the film ended up falling into public domain. This is a big part of the Night of the Living Dead trying to regain rights to the film and recoup some of its not insubstantial earnings. I mean, it was Night of the Living Dead made something like $30 to $50 million on a $100,000 budget, and Romero and Image 10 saw very, very little of that.
Was there ever any litigation about that between
yes,
Romero and the distributor?
They spent years and years in court. Yes.
Because I was going to say that's clearly negligence on the part of the distributor.
Yeah. So during these years, at the time when this movie was in the public domain, pretty much anyone was legally free to do whatever the hell they wanted with the film, including there was, a colorized version of it that came out in the 80s, because people could do that. They could release bootleg DVDs or VHSs or whatever they wanted to. Now, Image 10, after years and years in court, they would eventually regain the rights to the film. But at this time, Russo, as the co-founders of Image 10 and trustees of the company, they spent years just trying to protect their newly required copyright. They would try to track down pirated videos, bootleg t-shirts, and have them taken off the market, which is a strenuous, thing to have to do over and over and over again. And for years, it was totally legal for people to do that. Part of their responsibility as trustees of the company also included doing a remake of the film. So then news gets to George Romero that a guy named Menahem Golan, I don't know if you recognize that name, but he was one of the two cousins who owned the famous Canon Group. If you remember the Canon logo that showed up at the beginning of films in the 80s, he was one of the guys who began that.
Yeah, Golan referred to it as precious, right?
Got him.
So he was apparently interested in doing a remake for his new company, which was called 21st Century Film Corporation.
Do it as precious, right?
Got him.
So he was apparently interested in doing a remake for his new company, which was called 21st Century Film Corporation. So Romero and Russo buried the hatchet, the legal hatchet. Apparently, according to both of them, there was never any kind of personal animosity between them. It was all just a difference of opinion on where this property should go. They never really butted heads in their personal lives, if that makes sense. So they made a deal with Golan, and Romero, Russo, and Streiner came on board as producers, but with Romero taking sole screenwriting duties this time. So he basically rewrote his and Russo's original screenplay to fit a more modern film.
Did they go into like the specific changes of what made it modern? Because I mean, the original kind of seems. I mean, it seems kind of timeless.
Yeah, but there are some things that I'm sure we'll discuss here that he updated to fit more modern sensibilities.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was.
We fix that in the subsequent.
Let's
22
just
years.
go ahead and check that off the list.
Yeah.
We're done. We got it. Taken care of.
As far as why Romero didn't just direct it himself, it was just simply because he was not available to do so. By the time Night of the Living Dead was in pre-production, he was already well underway working on another film of his own, which was an adaptation of the Stephen King novel, The Dark Half, which he was doing for Orion Pictures, who he had worked with on Monkey Shines. So logically, Tom Savini came on board to do the makeup effects for the new Night of the Living Dead. I mean, who else are they going to ask, right? But Romero actually persuaded him to direct it as well. Savini even says, he's like, George told me, I'm available if you have any questions or anything, but this is your movie. Do with it as you want, and I'll be there to back you up.
That's pretty great. Because we've seen before where department supervisor ends up getting the director's chair, and they end up focusing on a particular aspect of the film. Thusly, the film kind of falls flat. So for Romero to say, "Hey, you've clearly got the chops for this," that's got to make Savini feel pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he totally trusted him.
Yeah.
So they shot the film just outside of Pittsburgh, obviously, where I think we've already figured out that trend on these Romero films. They're shooting in and around Pittsburgh. This was specifically shot in a rural area about 25 miles south of Pittsburgh. But it was not, by most accounts, especially by Savini's account, not a very pleasant shoot. So Savini actually described it as the worst nightmare of my life.
Really?
So without Romero on set, he would just constantly clash with the film's other producers. He was unable to fully realize his vision for the film because Romero was absent from the set completely for the first half of the shoot because he was busy writing The Dark Half.
Haters were producers.
Yeah, they were the guys he was working for.
Awesome.
In fact, here's I've read an interview with Savini in Film Monthly. And here's a little quote from that. He says, I got stuck with these two idiot producers that didn't know anything, and their careers prove it. And I didn't want to make their bad movie for them. He says, my hands were just slapped all over the place. I couldn't do a lot of stuff. The movie is about 40% of what I intended to do. It would be a much better movie if I had gotten to put in all the stuff that I really wanted to do. And then, of course, they had to battle with the MPAA in addition to battling with their own producers. So Savini, he says the movie's only about 40% of what he wanted to do. And that doesn't mean that they only put like 40% of his footage in. I mean, this is all his footage, but they didn't get to shoot necessarily the footage that he really wanted to do, like what his original vision was.
So he rides high from getting tossed the keys by Romero, but with a car full of idiots.
Necessarily the footage that he really wanted to do, like what his original vision was.
So he rides high from getting tossed the keys by Romero, but with a car full of idiots.
Yeah.
He's got to drive around. God.
Exactly.
Ugh.
Like one thing he wanted to do, for example, was he wanted to shoot the opening in the graveyard in black and white, like in the original film, and then have it like gradually fade into color, which I think would have been super cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
I think that would
that'd be really cool.
What a great idea. Why would you not let him do that? That's so fun. But the producer said no.
Yeah, they seem to be really bad about cutting stuff. I saw that same interview you were talking about on like a Film Monthly, and he talks about the MPAA kept making them cut stuff, but then they didn't really have an option to be there for some. It was like these producers were like cutting stuff, and so I think that was from the same interview. But he just talks about the film being basically a sterile version of what he wanted, with like him and George's name on it.
Right. So let's talk about the cast of this a little bit. In the lead, what I would consider the lead of this version is Barbara, Patricia Tallman, who we know her from a couple of past episodes. She was a Pittsburgh resident, a graduate of Romero and Savini's alma mater there at Carnegie Mellon University. And she, of course, had worked with them on Night Riders as one of the main characters on that. Night Riders was her first film. And after that, she had mostly appeared in television or in small bit parts in movies. Like if you look at her IMDb, she's credited as Bandstand Babe in Roadhouse or Possessed Witch in Army of Darkness, like these little bit parts.
Yeah.
But she's mostly well known to a lot of, especially sci-fi fans, for her frequent appearances on various Star Trek series as various aliens or various characters, and for a long-running lead role on Babylon 5. But her primary occupation on Tales from the Dark Side, Monkey Shines, and Creepshow 2. And then on Star Trek, she was a stunt person on a lot of episodes. She was actually the stunt double for Gates McFadden on Star Trek The Next Generation.
Nice.
And then she would go on to be the stunt double for like Laura Dern in Jurassic Park and Gina Davis in The Long Kiss Goodnight. Like, she's got a really long resume, but when you see her as an actress, it's mostly in like really small parts, which is kind of a bummer because I think she's really actually quite good in this movie, and she never had a role this meaty again after this.
You can totally tell that Savini has this like admiration for, Sigourney Weaver and Alien, and so that's what's going on here. And he knows, I mean, like all the stuff you said. I mean, I think they actually went to college together. So he's known Patricia Tallman for a long time, but he knew, I've seen him describe her, like how badass he knew she was already in person. So he wanted to really take advantage of that. Like he describes, they went to college together. So he's known Patricia Tallman for a long time, but he knew, I've seen him describe her, like how badass he knew she was already in person. So he wanted to really take advantage of that. Like he describes like him seeing her do stuff like stunts when she was pregnant. Like she still insisted on doing, like he said, I think one of them was like her falling off a pirate ship in Star Trek Generations, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we've got Tony Todd as Ben in the other lead role. Of course, we all know Tony. Yeah, we know Tony Todd. He's Candyman, but and he's a legend. I mean,
yeah.
But at the time that he was cast as Ben in this film, he was just kind of getting started in his film career, he had a couple of movie roles under his belt, the most prominent being in Oliver Stone's Platoon a few years earlier. And much like Tallman, he's actually got some Star Trek cred as well. In 1991, he appeared on The Next Generation as Kern, which is Worf's brother, in I think three episodes. I think he showed up for a fourth appearance on Deep Space Nine later on, if I remember correctly.
I believe you are correct, sir.
So, and then by 1992, of course, he was firmly rooted as a horror legend for his role in Candyman. And that's kind of his thing now. He's just like a horror guy. He shows up in horror movies all over the place. He works the horror conventions. I mean, he's the horror legend that you throw in for a cameo, like in Hellfest, things like that. Like that's just who Tony Todd is now. But this was kind of before all that.
There's worse gigs.
He's a baby. He's a baby Tony Todd.
Yeah, I think he's pretty good in this too, and wouldn't necessarily. I mean, yes, this is a horror film, but he's far from like the villain that he would later be known as in horror.
Yeah, he gets to show a lot of range in this one, I think.
More than you normally get from him, honestly. Then you've got Tom Towles as Harry Cooper. Now, Tom Towles at the time was best known as Otis in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, and appearances in Rob Zombie films. He's the sheriff in The Devil's Rejects and House of a Thousand Corpses, things like that. But,
okay. I was like, God, he looks so familiar, but I didn't want to cheat.
Well, he looks very different in the Rob Zombie movies too. He's got the big Marlboro Man mustache, and he's bald, and
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I wanted to say too, Justin, about Tony Todd. I thought this was interesting. I meant to say this with the range thing that I was talking about. I mean, that was what got him the job. I remember seeing Savini saying that he had Lawrence Fishburne, Eric LaSalle read for him. But
Ving Rhames,
but then
who would later be in the Dawn of the Dead remake,
right, which is interesting enough. Yeah. But no, he said like Tony Todd walked in, he handed Todd the script and said that Tony Todd walked out for like 5 minutes, came back in, knew every line of dialogue perfectly, and produced real tears. And he said he immediately just closed the book and was like, "Oh yeah, that's been real tears." And he said he immediately just closed the book and was like, "Oh yeah, that's been."
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's great.
Awesome. So Tom Towles, real quick, a fun little psychotronic connection that I think Gary will find interesting if no one else does. I found it interesting. But before breaking out in film, he was a stage actor. He is from Chicago, and he was a member of Chicago's Organic Theater Company, which if you were a listener of the Psychotronic Film Society of me and Gary's old podcast, you will know that was a theater company that was founded by Reanimator director Stuart Gordon. So Tom Towles, actually, that's where he got his start, under the tutelage of Stuart Gordon.
Look at this. It's a small world after all, Justin.
All connects.
So William Butler plays Tom, who is the like little dorky dude from the original one who gets killed because his girlfriend is an idiot. And this one, they're kind of recast as like rednecks, I guess. So they got their Steelers, an idiot. And this one, they're kind of recast as like rednecks, I guess. So they got their Steelers hats on and stuff. But I went down a rabbit hole looking at this guy's career, because I went on his IMDb and I started looking at all these like credits. I was like, what? Who the hell is this guy? so he is, this is according to his own IMDb bio. He is the only actor in movie history to have been killed by Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, the zombies from Night of the Living Dead, and Freddy Krueger.
Nice.
He's in Friday the 13th Part 7, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, and then in 2 episodes of Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series with Freddy Krueger.
Nice.
Wow.
And so he spent most of his time in the last 20 years as a writer director with a really weird, really diverse portfolio that sort of splits itself between a lot of Disney Channel TV shows and a lot of shitty Charles Band movies, like Demonic Toys 2 he directed, and the Ginger Dead Man, 2 Ginger Dead Man movies.
Yeah, I really reject you using the word shitty before this.
The Passion of the Crust, is that the second one, right?
Yeah, that's the second one.
Yeah.
I don't get the shitty reference though.
Wow, yeah. I mean, do you just love Gary Busey's performance in those movies?
Oh man. Well, as I recall, what happens is Gary Busey has like 5 minutes in the movie, and they just record it. They just like replay some of the same lines he uses in that.
Yeah. They had him for one day, and that's it. And they just reuse his dialogue over and over.
That's how it works. That's movie magic, folks.
So, and here's another odd connection between William Butler and Night of the Living Dead. He also wrote the screenplays for Return of the Living Dead 4 and 5, which is like Rave Beyond the Grave and something else, I remember. Which, in another weird Psychotronic Film Society connection, those films were directed by Elori Ekoyam, who did 8-Legged Freaks, which was the official last episode of our last podcast.
Okay.
Nice. That's interesting. What a great callback.
Fun?
Speaking of callbacks too, Tom wears the Iron City Brewing Company beer logo on his shirt, which is like the same beer that like I think the bikers are drinking in Dawn of the Dead. It's like it's appeared throughout some of George's movies.
Well, it's a real brewery, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real brewery. And I think the Latent Image had done a commercial for them, like when they first started out or something.
That sounds right.
Some interesting cameos in this one too, you know, like George A. Romero's the voice on the radio at the end, but Russell Striner, who was Johnny in the OG, is the sheriff at the end.
He's the sheriff at the end who says like they're all messed up, right?
Yeah.
And Chili Billy Cardilli is in it again.
Yeah.
And we didn't even mention Bill Moseley as the new Johnny in this one.
How did we? Yeah.
And Chili Billy Cardilli is in it again.
Yeah.
And we didn't even mention Bill Moseley as the new Johnny in this one.
How did we not mention
Bill Moseley? You not mention Bill Moseley? Bill Moseley was, I mean, I guess he wasn't like Bill Moseley's career is really interesting because he's like, we'll probably talk about him more on an episode where he's featured a little bit more, because it's really more of a cameo in this movie.
Like he had already done Chop Top, but I don't think
he had done Chop Top, and that's kind of what he was known for. But between Chop Top and this, which is about 4 years, I want to say Texas Chainsaw 2 is 86.
It was. Yeah.
He had not done a lot of, he had done more bit parts. Like Chop Top was not like a big breakout role for him because that movie did not perform very well. Obviously, it's very well regarded now by a lot of genre fans, but at the time it wasn't very well received. So it's not like that was a big breakout role for him. And we consider Bill Moseley like Tarantino did John Travolta. You know, like he brought him back. He brought his career back from the dead, essentially.
Oh, look at that clever use of words.
Hey, at least put him back more in the, I don't know, in the public image, I guess, in roles that are more widely seen.
Or the latent image. Right.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
You're right.
So the film special effects, obviously Savini's busy being a director. He can't do the special effects as well, not directly. So the special effects in this were done under the supervision of Everett Burrell and John Volek for their company called Optic Nerve, which is still around today, I believe. They were really young at the time, 24 and 28 years old, respectively, working on this. And they had actually studied under Savini. They had worked with him on Friday the 13th. They worked on Alien with Ridley Scott. So they've got a pretty good resume at this point.
I was wondering if that's ever intimidating that like Tom Savini's the director and now you've got to do special effects. It's almost like if Da Vinci bought an apartment and he's like, I'm sticking on these 2 walls. I'm going to have somebody paint some murals. You guys go at it.
I don't have time. You guys do it.
You'd be pretty, I don't know. You'd be like, I'm going to shit my pants.
That's a good sketch. I'll write that up.
So Burrell and Volek, under Savini's direction, they were kind of moving away from the excess that had kind of begun to define the zombie films. Much of what we discussed, like back in our Day of the Dead episode, how they had kind of ramped up the gore and the violence and everything. They kind of wanted to move away from that, instead taking a kind of less is more approach to it. They wanted the zombies to feel realistic. They wanted they wanted it to look more like someone's next door neighbor, not mutant aliens. That's the way they described it. So they wanted it to look more like someone's next door neighbor, not mutant aliens. That's the way they described it. So what they did is they actually they researched by attending an autopsy. This sounds actually a lot like what Stuart Gordon did for Reanimator, because he went to like a morgue, I think, to study what corpses look like. But they went to an autopsy. They studied pathology textbooks, and they even looked at footage of like Holocaust victims, not like dead, but like ones who were still alive, like in concentration camps, because they were emaciated. And they're like, this is the closest that a living being has ever been to the living dead, essentially.
That's not wrong.
No, not at all. I think that's a really interesting approach, and I think you can see it. Now, of course, there are embellishments like the white of the eyes, which I think is a really cool look, honestly,
I like
in this.
that.
And I don't know, I mean, you see that a lot in zombie movies now. Like, I want to say like something even as recent as Train to Busan, I think their eyes are white
stuff, but Romero was kind of,
his stuff didn't really have that look, though.
Well, that's what I mean.
eyes.
I was going to say he was kind of the trendsetter for anything that happened in it. I don't recall it being in any of those movies,
other than Evil Dead 2,
Yeah.
which technically those are not zombies, but that was before this. And Evil Ash, like his eyes are whited out like that. But
Yeah, that's the one that sticks out to me.
yeah. They were contractually obligated to get an R rating on this, which is kind of a bummer. But so because of that, a lot of the effects ended up on the cutting room floor. So here's actually an excerpt that I took from Savini's book, Grand Illusion. Grand Illusion 1, I think, is what this one's from. He's got 2 of them.
Time can become your enemy on a project. Actually, it's the lack of time that robbed us of some juicy stuff we had planned. And the ratings board that robbed us of some of the juicy stuff we did shoot. You didn't get to see the head squibs that we did on some of the zombies or the actual head explosion when Tom shotguns the burning zombie from the truck. I actually fired both barrels of when Tom shotguns the burning zombie from the truck. I actually fired both barrels of a double barrel shotgun into the fake head of that dummy.
We didn't get to see it, which is a real bummer of a moment in the movie, I think, when you see him on the back of the bed of the truck and shoot it, and then you don't get to see the explosion. What a bummer, right?
Yeah. So was he talking about an actual dummy, or was he calling William Butler a dummy?
Yeah, he shot William Butler in the head.
That's why we don't see much out of William Butler acting.
Well, his head was reconstructed, but he had brain damage, hence Ginger Dead Man 2, Passion of the Christ.
That's really an allegory about the the PTSD or something that came out of that, a metaphor for the PTSD he suffered from.
That's probably what it is. I'm sure there's a lot of just really deep analytical stuff we could talk about.
That joke's got so many layers, you guys. So many layers.
Ginger Dead Man. So other things that did not
that joke's got so many layers, you guys. So many layers.
Ginger Dead Man. So other things that did not make it into the film included Tom actually catching fire and running under the truck, causing it to explode, which kind of recalls the original film. It's kind of a bummer that you didn't get to see that. And then one very like extremely cool sounding scene where Ben's trying to save Barbara from an approaching zombie. I sent you guys the storyboards on this. So, which the storyboards are also in Grand Illusion. I'll try to throw them up on like our Instagram or something because it's really fun to see. So Ben's trying to save Barbara from this zombie who's coming. So he sticks the barrel of his gun into the zombie's mouth as it's like coming towards him, trying to bite him. And he pulls the trigger, but the chamber is empty. It's a revolver. Chamber is empty. There's only one round left in the pistol. They do show like a close up of the pistol. You can see there's one bullet in there, and it slowly like rotates.
Yeah.
And when it finally fires, when the bullet fires, we travel as the bullet through the zombie's head. So you've got this shot of like going through the zombie's head as blood splashes on Barbara, who's behind it, which sounds like an amazing shot and would be super cool if they had been allowed to film it.
Yeah, that would have been really awesome.
There's an entire book that came out last year called like The Unseen Version or The Night of the Living Dead 90 You Never Saw, something like that, where it's a bunch of the storyboards with annotations by Tom Savini, where you get to see kind of what his original intention for the film was. And he had some badass effects planned for this that he just either through time, because of time constraints, like you mentioned in that quote that Gary read, or just because the producers or the MPAA wouldn't let him, never made the film.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it's not like there's a direct.
Going back to something we were talking about, I think in that documentary, he talks about, or he says to watch the documentary and you get a good feel for some of that stuff. But he said, it just never even got added in. And it was disappointing for him because he thought that audiences would have expected with his name and George's name, like a whole gore fest. And,
right.
Like we said, it's kind of sterile. And then he describes that, this is the point where I had that note actually down there. He says, this is a quote from me. He says, I wasn't even involved in the initial editing. Columbia bought the picture from 21st Century while we were shooting it, which reduced our post-production time. Instead of 10 weeks for post-production, we had 4 weeks to rush the film out for a Halloween release. They took the film out to California, and whenever the MPAA said cut something, they just did it on their own. I would have argued, I would have changed the color of the blood, done something to keep more footage in there, but it just didn't happen that way.
It's a bummer.
Yeah. He said even the autopsy zombie, like he had to fight for that, that zombie walking along. He said they almost didn't even let him shoot that one. They were running out of time and they just kept denying it. And he finally got the guy who was the zombie instructor on set, Tim Carrier, I think's his name.
Jim Carrey.
Yeah, Jim Carrey. But said he had to make him just throw it on and go out there and do it so they could just at least get that.
The film was released on October 19th, 1990, to pretty negative reactions from critics. So Roger Ebert, who we like to reference here because I feel like he's just the most famous film critic of all time, he gave it 1 out of 4 stars, said the remake is so close to the original that there's no reason to see both. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly said, in the history of bad ideas, George Romero's decision to produce a color remake of his disturbingly frenzied 1968 zombie fest Night of the Living Dead has to rank right up there with New Coke. That's Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly said, in the history of bad ideas, George Romero's decision to produce a color remake of his disturbingly frenzied 1968 zombie fest Night of the Living Dead has to rank right up there with New Coke. That's the most 1990 fucking review I've ever heard.
Wow.
Comparing it to New Coke.
See, and that quote alone, the part that it lets me in on is that Owen obviously thought New Coke would be successful enough to last. So I don't know, like if he thought this review would play years later.
I don't think he cared about years later.
Yeah,
most critics are writing for the time,
Well, guess what? We're pulling your shit up right now on this show from
That's right.
1990. So keep that in mind.
He didn't know the internet was going to be a thing back then.
You're right.
Modern reassessments have been a lot more kind to this film, I think, because it's kind of gained a pretty big cult following. What do you guys think? Do you think this is like a worthy remake? Do you like it? Do you think it was unfairly criticized upon release? Do you think what are y'all's thoughts on this?
Well, you guys know how big of a Batman fan I am, and as I get older,
Batman?
yeah, I know it's weird, right?
Don't ask to see his tattoo.
But
No, seriously, don't.
no, yeah, don't. But as I've gotten older, I've gained a fondness for all the different versions of Batman, from the 60s, the 80s and 90s, on into the newer stuff, and even the serials from the 40s. There's stuff I love about that one as well. So I'm good with this. This is totally fine. Again, you think about Savini was such a big fan of Romero, and this was such a important. He put up clearly with a lot of bullshit from the producers to even just get this, in the can. And you got to think that even having his name up there after the title card, directed by, Night of the Living Dead, directed by Tom Savini, he has to get a chill from that.
That's got to be cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is it perfect? No. Is there stuff that, probably should have been in it to make it even cooler? Of course. But, honestly, I really dug this. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the character interactions between, Barbara and Ben. And I felt like it was definitely more intense once you introduced the rest of the characters in the house. And yeah, I was in it from the word go. So,
In it to win it. Gary,
yeah.
what do you think? Initial thoughts.
Yeah, I'm actually a fan of this one.
And yeah, I was in it from the word go. So,
In it to win it. Gary,
yeah.
what do you think? Initial thoughts.
Yeah, I'm actually a fan of this one. I think it's good enough, and like some of the stuff that they seem to be bothered by, I don't think stood out to me at first. Like the lack of gore. I thought the effects that are in it are very good, and so I think I probably looked at that as more of a just like maybe we're paying homage to the original, that there's just not like a lot of over the top gore. I know.
Well, that's what Savini said. Like he wanted it to. He thought that he is quoted as saying he thought it would be disrespectful to the original to go too over the top with the gore like he had in Day of the Dead.
Right.
So it was never his intention to make this a gore fest necessarily, but he did intend to make it gorier than it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it works well enough, and I think the Tillman and Otis and I forgot his name for some reason. But anyway, yeah, I'm okay with this one. I remember as a kid, actually, honestly, watching this one, I think more than the original at the time, and I think that was probably just
because it was black and white.
Yeah, the black and white BS.
I mean, I think it's an incredibly flawed film. Certainly, like Todd said, it's not perfect. I think maybe compromised is a better term. It feels like you can tell that this is not what Savini had intended. It feels like it's neutered, kind of, like it feels like this is just, there's something missing. You can't quite put your finger on it. Yes, the gore is part of it, because here's the thing. You see Romero, like just like Savini said in that interview you were quoting, Gary, Savini says, hey, you see my name and Romero's name on this, you're expecting a certain kind of movie because we did Day of the Dead, we did Dawn of the Dead. Like, you expect some wild over the top shit, and you don't get that here. Honestly, it's pretty straightforward. And even though that Savini and the Optic Nerve guys never intended this to be as gory as Day of the Dead, they couldn't, because they were contractually obligated. They signed on to do an R-rated film, whereas Dawn and Day were both released unrated. They couldn't do that this time. But it still feels like what he did intend to put in it still didn't make it to the screen, But with that said, I still think the movie's underrated, or at least at the time of the way it was regarded at the time of release, that it was underrated. And I do think it deserves the kind of re-examining that it's received in more recent years.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, there are very few remakes that stand up to their originals, and even fewer that prove to be better than the originals. I do that assessment. And a lot of remakes are just totally dismissed upon release, especially by genre fans. And often they're soon forgotten after release, which wasn't, this movie wasn't necessarily forgotten. It's had a life, especially when it hit VHS and stuff. And it has, I don't know, it has the distinction of being a pretty decent film with some really good effects work. But one thing you can't deny is that Romero's film, the original film, was so singular and so iconic that any attempt to remake it, whether Romero's involved or not, it's going to have a hard time living up to that original film. That original film created the zombie subgenre. Like anybody trying to redo that is, you got big shoes to fill.
Yeah, sterile is a good term, I think, for it. We've seen that pop up a couple of times, and it does feel that way a little. Is a good term, I think, for it. We've seen that pop up a couple of times, and it does feel that way a little bit. I feel like there's probably stuff he would have preferred to flesh out a little bit more in what was going on, and I don't know. The pacing feels fine, but. Yeah, you said it best, I think, looking back on it. It does feel like there's something missing, but I couldn't sit here and tell you exactly.
Kind of hard to put your finger on it, you know? I do think, okay, so there are some distinct differences between the original film and Romero's rewritten script, his kind of reimagining, that are definitely worth talking about. The main difference being the character of Barbara. I mean,
yeah.
Much to the disdain of feminists and Garys everywhere, the original Barbara was. I mean, what did you call her, Gary? What did you call her in your review of Night of the Living Dead? You just said "fuck Barbara."
Yeah, something like that.
I think that's what you said.
I was going to say, did I come up with a clever name? Because
I think you just said "fuck Barbara."
I think I took the more caveman approach to.
Well, I think my wife had the question for both of you was, is she the worst in every horror movie? Is she
talking about the original Barbara?
Yeah, the original Barbara.
I don't know that she's the worst, but she's bad. Yeah. There are worse. There are more annoying ones, I think. At least she spends most of that film kind of hysterical, like in this near catatonic state, like completely helpless. And of course, that's something that Romero, as we've discussed on other episodes, he kind of tried to apologize for that or make up for it for like the rest of his career by writing strong women as his leads, you know? So here he does the same thing. He reimagines Barbara as a strong woman and as a fighter. The exact opposite of what the original Barbara was. And you've still got that sort of what she saw happen to her brother has kind of driven her crazy. But instead of going like catatonic, she goes the other direction and just dials it up and just becomes like, fucking Ellen Ripley is who she becomes. She becomes Ripley.
Right. Aliens, I think one of the things they say about your protagonist is it's the person that goes through the biggest change throughout the narrative. And looking at the original, I feel like not a lot happens with Barbara in terms of the change of her character.
Sure, nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, she turns off.
Right. And Ben clearly becomes the focus of the original. Whereas with the 1990 remake, I feel like
Barbara's more the lead than Ben.
Yeah, she clearly takes the bigger character arc. She has the biggest
than Ben.
Yeah, she clearly takes the bigger character arc. She has the biggest change.
Which is interesting because as we discussed in the original one, it kind of does a switcheroo on you, where she starts off seeming like she's going to be the protagonist because it starts off with her and her backstory and Johnny. And then it kind of Ben shows up and he kind of takes over the movie. In this one, Ben shows up, but he still is he's the secondary lead, but it's still Barbara's story, even though she's still she's still very quiet. She doesn't talk as much as Ben or as Cooper, but I feel like it's her narrative more than it is Ben's this time around.
Well, and I think that's the end result of that is you get a story that's a little more complicated. You get, fans are having to really pay attention to everyone and everything that's happening. And it's not until, almost the very end where you see, this is absolutely.
And, but she actually does get better and eventually surpass him even in like her assertiveness and that sort of thing. So much so that, she's trying to calm him and what's his face down because like they're fucking fighting over everything. Like it's just,
that's all they do. The whole film is they just bicker the entire time. She's the only one getting anything really done, you know?
Right, exactly.
So it's like too busy.
So maybe if there is any sort of a statement, which I've seen stuff with like Savini, like not really caring too much to like say that necessarily. I mean, clearly she's a stronger female character, but it almost does seem to have this moment of like, look at the testosterone fueled bullshit that you get out of these two guys.
Yes.
Like that they're fighting with each other and she's the one who's like got to keep a level head. And, you know, she's got an analytical way even, and you could, I feel like you can kind of see it in this when she's looking at the bodies of like, who's like got to keep a level head. And, you know, she's got an analytical way even, and you could, I feel like you can kind of see it in this when she's looking at the bodies of like when she's killed the one she's rolling up in the carpet or whatever. She just kind of stares at it for a little bit, or she's like looks outside sometimes and just sees them. It's like she's studying what she's seeing so that she even has that idea. Like we could get out of here. We could run past them. Like we're
she's
faster.
The only one that like while Ben and Cooper are yelling at each other and trying to figure out, do we stay upstairs? Do we go downstairs? Like, you know, she's the one that's like, let's just fucking leave. Like, look, they're slow. We can run past them. And in the end, that's how she survives is by leaving the house. Yeah. And they both die. You know?
Yeah. They're just both trying to fight. That's a good point. Yeah. They're both just trying to find the best place to hole up.
Yeah. And they die by shooting each other, by their own bickering is what takes them out.
Yeah. And ultimately wanted to go like, Cooper wants to go down in the basement, ends up in the attic, and like Ben's down in the basement, and
dying, bleeding out, where he finds the key to the gas tank that they've been fighting over for half the movie. Right. They had just stopped yelling at each other and worked together, and you know that's kind of the story they're telling here. Is like, hey, if you just work together, then you could get out of here. If they had just worked together and searched for this key instead of yelling at each other the whole time. Which is what not only gets them killed, but gets old Tom and Judy Rose or whatever her name is killed, you know, out on the truck with a big truck explosion. Like in the original film, they could have just left, you know, it wasn't that hard. But Barbara is like, she's the one who is able to say, she's the one that, she's the, I guess the transformation, like you said, is the best way to put it. Cause she starts off, even, you know, with the big glasses, I don't know, but you see her with like a bandolier over her shoulder and a rifle. Like she looks like a badass, right? She's even got that short haircut like Ellen Ripley, you know, she's become like the hero. She's become a vigilante of some sort at that point. And her transformation is sort of the catalyst for that final act of the film, which is the final act is where it really departs from the original movie, because everything in the first like 2/3 of the movie, even though there are small differences here and there, the story beats are pretty much identical. Yeah. Up until the point where she decides to change. And then the whole third act is pretty different from the original film. Because, you know, like both Harry and Ben die, but in very different fashions than in the original film. Because, of course, Ben gets shot by Ben and Cooper shoot each other. Ben bleeds out and then turns into a zombie himself, which Barbara has to execute. And then shoot each other. Ben bleeds out and then turns into a zombie himself, which Barbara has to execute. And then Barbara, who at this point has turned into just like, she's just turned cold-blooded, just fucking kills Cooper in cold blood. You know? Yeah,
I was going to say, it's funny. Like she goes from like at the beginning being like almost afraid to fight to not wanting to be like a killer at all to like, now I'll shoot the little girl version. I'll be the one that's like, y'all got to kill that little girl. And then just like, fuck it. You know what? I don't even care if there's a zombie anymore. Like, I'll just kill somebody.
Yeah. It's crazy. And, but
and she also, just one more little thing. She learns, you watch her face as she's talking to some of the onlookers, and you see she's already learned how to sort of blend in with their crowd so as not to raise their suspicions. And
you've also got
that to me was really fascinating.
You've also got that moment where those rednecks here by yourself, and she just kind of rolls her eyes at them like, motherfuckers, y'all don't know what I've been through and what I've survived. And it's a great moment, honestly. It's like her. I wish the rest of the film were as strong as her character arc is.
Right.
I wish that it had as much bite to it as her specific arc in that last act of the movie does. Because I feel like a lot of it doesn't quite live up to that. Because she's definitely the character that you have empathy with. Like in the original one, you have empathy with Ben, I think, but this one it's really more her, because Ben in this version is shit. He's almost as bad as Cooper. Like they're just yelling at each other right from the get-go for no reason. And Tony Todd's very good in it, and you sympathize with him a little bit. You don't think he's a bad person, but I guess Cooper just really gets under his skin. Now Cooper, on the other hand, is just an asshole for no reason immediately.
Yeah,
Cooper's
that's one of the flaws, I think, person, but I guess Cooper just really gets under his skin. Now Cooper, on the other hand, is just an asshole for no reason immediately.
Yeah, Cooper's
that's one of the flaws, I think.
He's cartoonishly dickish.
That's one of the flaws. One of the major flaws of the film, I think, is I think Tom Towles is a great actor, but I think that he just has that performance. He's just dialed it up to like 11 the entire time, and it's like, bro, like you're gonna like watch your blood pressure, man. Like,
well, if I can just say, I thought this is a rare moment where you'll hear me talk about the costuming, but the addition of him wearing a tuxedo, I felt added to that. Like he thinks he's better than everybody else. So
exactly.
Go ahead and throw him in a tuxedo, and just an asshole to the nth degree. And that tuxedo really just the cherry on the cake.
Yeah, I don't know if they were playing up on the race thing, but like there's some level of it that he's just like, I refuse that this guy is going to give me orders. Like, I'm just not gonna be subservient to Ben. And Ben just has this, like, he's sympathetic in that you can tell he's a good dude, but it almost shows like the tragic flaw of that as well, I think, is what they're going for. That like Ben is also like, I'm the alpha, I'm the hero, I'm the in charge. And the second he gets somebody that pushes back on that, it's just like, now this is my arch nemesis. Like, I have to like butt heads with him constantly and everything he does. And I mean, and they do play with that, because I mean, when Cooper is taking the TV and Ben gets like all riled up about that, and it's like, you're trying to take it to the basement, and he's like, I can't even get reception in the basement. Like, I wasn't taking it to the basement. And and so I don't know. And so by the end of
dick measuring contest,
right,
and that's what spells their doom.
Don't want to do that with Tony Todd, I'm guessing.
Do not.
Did you guys find that on Pornhub?
Yep.
Was that one of the
that's a trending search?
Okay, there you go.
Candyman. Say it 5 times.
Candyman's candy cane.
say go to Pornhub and type in Candyman 5 times. Tony Todd's dick will appear.
And you'll see Tony Todd's dick.
And it will split you from groin to gullet. Let me tell you. This is not a path I expected this show to go down.
But yeah, overall, I mean, closing thoughts for me, I think this is a decent film. I think it's a decent zombie movie.
Yeah.
Obviously, it does not hold up to the original in any way, shape, or form, but it's a decent film. I think it's a decent zombie movie.
Yeah.
Obviously, it does not hold up to the original in any way, shape, or form, but it's fine. I wish that Savini had been able to give us the version that he wanted. And I know that Savini he really hated the way the movie turned out. In recent years, if you watch Smoke and Mirrors, that Tom Savini documentary, he talks about how he's seen it more recently and that he has kind of come to terms with the movie that it is. And he's like, it's a good movie. It's not the movie I wanted. It's not a great movie. It's not as good as I wanted it to be, but it's a good movie. And I kind of agree with that. Like, it's a decent movie.
Yeah, it just feels, and he was going through the line. I did find this one quote from him that, somebody asked him, like, what big regrets from there. And he said, this is actually his quote. He said, time. We just didn't have enough time. If you look at Night of the Living Dead was the most horrible experience of my life. I couldn't wait to go home in the morning. I just didn't want to be there because they kept slapping my hands. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. And then my wife divorced me 3 weeks into shooting. So I was afraid of losing my daughter. So there was just a lot of turmoil. We're lucky we got what we did on the screen.
Holy shit.
Yeah, he is having a rough time, man. At the time, reviews were not kind, as we know, but some modern reassessments have been more kind to it, but not everyone loves this movie, right, Gary?
That's absolutely true. So that means it's time for Somebody Needs a Nap. I've got two here. One super quick. This first one comes from his name on Amazon is Microsoft is not a monopoly.
Yeah, it is.
And he says, "Oh my God. Yeah, he literally does
with
say
a Z.
that. Yeah, with a Z. "Oh my God, this is a totally crappy and boring, and the ending is heinous. 1 star. I mean, at least try to have a plot and not characters that act like loonies."
All right.
That's a 1-star review from
1 star.
Microsoft is not a monopoly. This is a little more thought out. This is from Robert Chatham. Love you, Robert. You write well. Should have taken a nap before writing this review, I feel like. He said, "Why did Romero do this? I cannot possibly understand why he would let his masterpiece be disgraced. I also don't understand how anyone could like this garbage. The worst part is that all of the characters have been turned into caricatures. There's no confusion over who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Remember in the original, Ben got locked out of the house with zombies crowding around him because Harry Cooper was too frightened to let him in. No, now he's locked out because Harry's trying to steal the gun from the plucky barber so he can take pox about the dead returning to life. He rolls his eyes and makes a goofy face as if to say, how could anyone take this seriously? Barbara weeps with a goofy half grin on her face, and it seems like all Judy does is scream like a 4-year-old. Everyone seems very self-aware, as if they just had acting lessons from the entire cast of the Scream films. The new ending and additional scenes are just garbage. We get a nice, feel-good, happy ending. Romero's original version of Night of the Living Dead as a social commentary of the 60s is reduced to this message. People get stupid when there's a crisis. Rock and roll, Savini. You surely hit the nail on the head with your remake of a classic. It's dumbed down and diluted for the masses."
Oh.
Well,
So, yeah, definitely needed a
somebody
nap
needs a
before
nap.
that. Jeez, I feel like I need a nap after that. Wow.
is that it?
That's it. That's all.
Well, then that spells the end of our first series on Cinema Shot, guys.
Yeah.
So, like I said before, a lot of these series are not going to be this long. Most of them are going to be a little more condensed. Some will be longer than others. Even sometimes when we do like a single filmmaker, which we're going to do a lot, like where we focus on a filmmaker's work. Sometimes we're going to split those up by like eras of their career and certain films, things like that. Not necessarily an entire filmography, which this wasn't an entire filmography, but it was a pretty damn big chunk of it. Some series that we do are going to be focused on franchises. Some are just going to be a theme, but so we're going to be all over the place. And we're starting a new series next week. So for the last 10 episodes, we've made Todd sit here and watch a bunch of horror movies that he didn't like.
Yeah.
This is this one. This is number 4, I think. So we're batting 40%.
Yeah.
Pretty low.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, Todd. It's not going to get a lot better than this one. This is number 4, I think. So we're batting 40%.
Yeah.
Pretty low.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, Todd. It's not going to get a lot better than this.
At least you're honest.
It's not. I mean, movies are going to be great. Let me tell you, we've got some really fun movies planned, some really fun series planned, but they're not going to get less weird and less esoteric than these movies necessarily. But we're going to spend the next few weeks doing some that are a little more mainstream, probably till the end of the year, really. Everything we're doing between now and the end of the year is going to be a little more mainstream, but then 2021 is going to get a little weird when we start off. But next week, because we've made Todd sit through 10 episodes of movies that he doesn't give a shit about, and because he's going to have to sit through a lot more movies that he doesn't give a shit about,
And
we're throwing him a bone
about it.
We're throwing him a bone next week. Nolan's Batman trilogy.
Oh yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
AKA the Dark Knight trilogy.
Dark Knight trilogy starting next week for the next 3 weeks. Then we're going to get into some Christmassy stuff after that, so which will be fun.
That'll be fun too.
So you guys know where to find Batman Begins. Starts things off. That's next week from 2005, right? Shit,
Yes.
15 years ago. God,
Yes.
it's crazy. It's streaming everywhere. Just you guys know where to find Batman Begins. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Or go to cinemashock.net. You can find a link to where you can stream it, watch it. You've seen it probably, but watch it again. Watch it with us. It'll be fun. You know.
Yeah, and you get to
October's
watch them.
over. You don't
When's
have
the
to
last
just
time you
watch
watched them all?
spooky movies anymore. You can watch some non-spooky movies.
Now
I
you
feel
got a
like-
reason to watch these back to back. Like,
Yeah.
see, just like
I just watched all 3 of them like a month ago. So
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you went through like all of his stuff, didn't you?
I went through every Christopher Nolan movie over the summer. Yeah,
see, just like
I just watched all 3 of them like a month ago. So
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you went through like all of his stuff, didn't you?
I went through every Christopher Nolan movie over the summer.
Nice.
Yes.
Well, it's been a while for me on these, so I'm excited to get back into it. I was actually talking to the wife not too long ago about wanting to do this because I honestly, the third one, Dark Knight Rises, I never saw outside of theaters.
Oh wow.
Todd, where are you on the internet?
I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
D&D Beyond. Gary.
At This Is Gary Horne on all the things.
And I am at Justin_Bishop, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, where I've been updating all of my movies that I've watched this Halloween. I've watched one every day, at least.
I'm dangerously behind on updating everything. I need to do that this
So is
week.
Gary. I keep trying to tell people to follow you guys, and then you don't update them. You got
I know movies, the horror movie marathon I've been going on. I haven't been good about updating. I'll try to work on that.
You work on that, Gary. You can find the website at cinema_shock on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find us on Facebook or at cinemashock.net. Until next week,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
Johnny tiene las llaves.
Is that Spanish?
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. Turns out, no, he fucking didn't, though. Not in the remake.
No.
He didn't have,
have the keys.
And
They
he
were in the
shot
basement.
a fucking gas pump.
Why would you do that? With a gun? Why would you shoot something filled with gasoline?
I don't know.
And because as soon as he aimed the gun at it, I was just like, oh, well, okay, well, that's how it ends.
Yeah, what a dummy.
What a dummy.
Are you retiring? Johnny Has the Keys since the George Romero series is done?
Like
I'll
now,
say-
next week, you could start.
He's just gonna go, I'm Batman. Favors? Is that what we're doing right
That's
now?
what we're doing.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Maybe you could go to like Why So Serious or something like that.
I will
Please,
seriously,
Jesus, for the love
seriously
of
consider
all,
it.
For the love of everything that is good in this world, do not start using Why So Serious.
Todd, I swear to God, please just show up in Joker face paint when we start this next week.
I just might. We'll see. I've been toying with the idea of taking the beard down anyway. So
All right. Well, there you go.
No, just as the weather gets cold, it seems like a great idea.
Post some pics to the social. We'll send them out over the Cinema Shock pages. Todd, just become an incel for this next series, please. All right, we gotta go.